Hello and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where usually we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order and then we rank them from best to worst. But sometimes when we go through chronological order, we come across movies that aren't necessarily horror but are important to the genre-logical journey we are taking. My name is Sarah.
And I'm Ben.
Thank you so much for joining us on one of these horror adjacent episodes.
Yes. This is the first horror adjacent episode we're doing since we kind of switched format on these. So
previously they were bonus episodes once a month, but we have since integrated them into the regular cadence of the show. Hence why we're not saying it's a bonus episode. It's just part of a regular episode.
Yes. And we're sort of covering them in chronological order just because it makes it a lot easier for us, honestly, with covering this stuff on the show.
How are you doing, Ben?
I'm doing pretty good today. We've kind of had like a bit of I want to say like muted or relaxed weekend here at Castle Scream Scene. In Canada, the day before we recorded this, it was Remembrance Day. We always like go out and go to a ceremony, and then we kind of, for the rest of the day yesterday, just sort of sat around and took things easy and watched a Studio Ghibli movie called Whisper of the Heart that I hadn't seen yet and really enjoyed.
Had good cat content.
This is true. So today, just, feeling a little quiet, a little muted, but things are probably going to pick up in energy here with tonight's movie.
I don't know. It's not a musical, Ben.
Not yet.
Yeah, as much as I would love to be watching the musical version, tonight we are watching The Little Shop of Horrors from 1960, directed by Roger Corman.
Yes. So you kind of, already stated this, but you're familiar with the musical.
That's the only connection to this movie that I have. I've only seen the musical. I've always wanted to see the original.
And like you've only seen the movie musical, like you haven't seen the musical on stage or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Only the movie, Rick Moranis, Steve Martin, you know, that stuff.
Did you kind of grow up with that movie?
No.
Oh, okay. I just feel like your mom makes like references to it all the time. So that's why I asked.
She also makes references to Arsenic and Old Lace, and yet I had never seen it all the way through.
That's fair. Your mom has a very like quotes based sense of humor.
I wonder where I get it from.
So The Little Shop of Horrors, as the original film was known, is pretty famous. It's pretty notorious. It's pretty significant in like the overall story of Roger Corman's career in some ways, and yet kind of not in others. It's almost like a bit of a weird hiccup or a last hurrah. There's a few different ways you can kind of look at it, but it's very well known horror adjacent movie.
It made sense for us to cover it.
Exactly. And like I knew going in that this wasn't going to rank. Like obviously the musical later in the 80s was also not going to rank, although how much there is a ratio of horror to comedy in the musical depends on which ending you're watching. But the original film is much more, comedy than horror, even if the comedy is very black comedy. Mm-hmm. It's a very...
Gallows humor,
yeah. Where Little Shop of Horrors comes from is Bucket of Blood. And if we cast our minds back to Bucket of Blood, we watched that in episode 281. And that movie did rank. It ranked at number 84. After filming wrapped on Bucket of Blood, this would be back in 1959, Roger Corman realized two things. The first was that shooting Bucket of Blood had been one of the most enjoyable experiences of his career. Just the fact of this like horror comedy atmosphere, it just was a lot of fun to do.
Sure.
The second was that since he had the sets rented for a week He shot Bucket of Blood in 5 days from Monday to Friday, which at the time was like, if I'm remembering correctly, was kind of like I bet you I can't shoot a movie in 5 days situation.
Yeah.
He realized that technically, because of the way that these rentals worked, he would still have access to these sets over the weekend as well, because the next production wouldn't come in until Monday. Could he shoot an entire extra movie in the 2 days remaining that he had?
Fascinating. Does he have a script at this point of realization?
No.
Okay, so he's doing full pre-production in this weekend as well.
No. So
Okay.
he kind of has this realization before he's shooting Bucket of Blood.
Okay.
Like pre-production for this movie happens while Bucket of Blood is shooting, essentially.
So still a condensed schedule.
Oh, very much so.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone could shoot a movie in 2 days, it would be Roger Corman, right?
Mm-hmm.
The production of Little Shop of Horrors, as I kind of hinted at a little while ago, was kind of something of a last hurrah from Corman in the sense of directing the kind of B-movie fare that he had built his career on up to this point. Mm-hmm. He would continue to produce these kind of cheap B-movies, but as we've already seen, he makes this transition to like bigger budget fare with Fall of the House of Usher. Now, Little Shop of Horrors was shot before Fall of the House of Usher, even though it was released after. I think that's important to note. And so Corman as a director moves up to this higher budget category and doesn't ever really go back to these kinds of like super cheap movies as a director. He does continue to produce these kinds of movies for like the rest of his career.
Yeah, well, that leads into the Roger Corman School of Directors,
Exactly.
who would be directing these while he would be producing them.
Yes, that is entirely correct. So part of the reason for why kind of Corman got out of these kind of B movies was, that ascension into higher budgets with Fall of the House of Usher. But there was also in and around this time a change that was happening in just like the economics of Hollywood that was about to make doing these kinds of movies a very different economic proposition. Because in 1960, in January of 1960, the Writers Guild of America and the Screen Actors Guild both went on strike. Mm-hmm. You see, there was this new technology, and it had come in and kind of disrupted the way that like the traditional distribution economics of Hollywood worked. And it meant that people were able to like watch things almost like on demand and like over and over again as well, and like rewatch things. And it meant that like content you had created like years ago could still be like recycled indefinitely without like any like value to you other than, what you were originally paid for it. And maybe at the time it wasn't too valuable, but now it's much more valuable. And isn't that kind of unfair? And so television, big sort of disruptor in the 1950s, right? So what the result of the 1960 writers and actors strikes was it ended the idea that when a producer bought your work, when they paid you for the film, they now owned the work you did for that in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Instead, we now had this idea of royalties in perpetuity for this work. So that, if you did a TV show and they reran that TV show for years and years and years, and maybe that show's even more popular in reruns than it was originally, you'd get paid a little bit, a couple cents on the dollar for every rerun. Or if the movie that you did was sold to TV and was getting shown on TV over and over again, you'd get some royalties on that every time it was shown. And that meant, from Roger Corman's side of things, that a movie could continue to cost its producer money long after that producer had made that movie, which meant that he was going to need to kind of switch to a different business model than what he'd been doing up to now, which was I'm going to make a movie. it'll make money, and then I'll make the next movie on the profits of the last movie, because now your budgeting needed to change and you're thinking about how you were financing things needed to change because you needed to be able to pay these royalties forever. So Little Shop of Horrors was very intentionally scheduled to be shot before these new rules would go into effect.
We talk a lot about Roger Corman, and we always try to acknowledge when he is a little shady.
You know, the thing is it is admirable the way he was able to get so much out of so little, right? There's an efficiency to what he's doing that you have to admire, but you have to kind of be a little skeezy to get that sort of efficiency as well. And you have to recognize where the loopholes are and where you can take advantage of things.
And advantage of people.
Yes.
All of which is to say Roger Corman is a whole person.
Yes.
Which means he is not all good and not all bad.
Problematic fave. So Charles B. Griffith, who had convinced Corman to try the horror comedy format to begin with Bucket of Blood, he was kind of the natural person to start writing a script for this new idea. So he got to work on a script, right away. I believe all in all, it was written in 3 days.
Wow.
Which is funny because it was completely rewritten 3 times. Like, I think there was a different version of the movie on each day. Initially, the story was about a private eye investigating a music critic named Draco Cardula, who turns out to be a vampire.
What? Really? With a name like that?
And that movie was called Cardula, and it was on the basis of that script that the actors were cast. So they were like, okay, who do we want to play these roles in this script? Basically drawing from like kind of the stock company of Roger Corman people, especially people who were already working on Bucket of Blood. So it could be like, hey, can you just come over for the weekend and like shoot another couple days? And so that was the script that was like sent out to actors and so on. And actor Mel Wells was going to play the main villainous role of Draco Cardula. Now, the next day, the script was totally rewritten to a different premise called Gluttony, which was
That's a better title.
This was going to be about a restaurant chef who cooks the customers.
Okay, yeah, I like this.
The problem is you couldn't do cannibalism per production code.
Oh.
So...
Well, see, they're not eating people. They're just eating pies, Ben.
So Griffith and Corman got really drunk. And, late on the second day, Griffith kind of threw out the idea, what about a man-eating plant? And Roger said, sure. And so the next day, Griffith wrote a script called The Passionate People Eater. And that's the script that was shot and was there on the day when the actors showed up.
I'm glad they changed the title from that.
The private eye elements from Cardula morphed into a framing narrative for the story of The Passionate People Eater that is a parody of the Dragnet television series.
Good.
The story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
So if you don't know Dragnet, listener, there's actually probably a good chance you know things from Dragnet that have continued to be parodied in pop culture to this day, to the point where like people still make these references without even knowing where they're from.
Just like the Naked Gun franchise,
Mm-hmm.
All of that.
Dragnet has this very like well-known theme song, among other things. Dragnet was a police procedural that ran for 8 seasons from 1951 to 1959 and was revived for more seasons like many times later. But in the context of us here in 1960, that initial 8-season run is what we're thinking of. The show starred series creator Jack Webb as Sergeant Joe Friday. and Ben Alexander as his partner, Frank Smith, and they were detectives working for the homicide department of the LAPD. The show was a huge hit, and it was highly influential. It was noted for its very serious and somber tone, its attempts at realism and accuracy, not wanting to sensationalize things, as well as its depiction of the police force as dedicated professionals, which reshaped American perception of police in the second half of the 20th century from kind of the first half of the 20th century, where they were kind of regarded as like crooked, idiot, bumbling buffoons who aren't your friends.
It's very interesting that they started with not sensationalizing. Fast forward 40 years and we get CSI.
Yeah, for sure. But even like the sort of like accuracy ethos of Dragnet like continued on into shows like Law and Order. The thing about Dragnet was like it had these very famous formulaic elements, the distinctive music, the style of narration and dialogue, which was very like taciturn, as well as like it had this famous opening narration on every episode about how the people and stories you're about to see are real and taken from the real case files, and only the names have been changed to protect the innocent, right? And that's like something that you still see variations of, either seriously like on Law and Order or in parody to this day. And so all of these very distinctive things did leave Dragnet very much open to very pointed parody, right? So in Griffith's script for this movie, Joe Friday becomes Joe Fink, and Frank Smith becomes Frank Stooley. The lead in the film's cast, playing the role of the nebbish, nerdy Seymour, was offered to Bucket of Blood star Dick Miller, but he turned it down because he was like, I was in almost every scene of Bucket of Blood for like 5 days. I wanted a weekend. So he chose to play a supporting role in the film, so he's still in this movie, but didn't have to shoot as much. So instead, the role of Seymour went to actor Jonathan Hayes, who was born Jack Schachter in Pittsburgh in 1929. His cousin was famous jazz drummer Buddy Rich, one of the people widely considered the best drummers of all time. And Schachter kind of got involved in showbiz, like working as an assistant for his cousin. And he had been acting in minor roles in Roger Corman movies since Monster on the Ocean Floor way back in 1954. But this would be his first like lead role.
Mm-hmm.
The female lead of Audrey was originally written for Nancy Culp, who had yet to break out as Miss Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies, but she turned it down, and so instead the role was cast with actress Jackie Joseph. She was born in LA in 1933 and had really only appeared in very minor roles on TV and film before this one. Now, when Cardula became the passionate people eater, Mel Wells's role as the lead villain was changed to flower shop owner Gravis Mushnick. Now, Wells was born Ira Melcher in the Bronx in 1924 to a Jewish family. And so Gravis Mushnick takes in a lot of like Turkish, Jewish mannerisms and things. There's a very like Yiddish humor sensibility about him. Wells himself had a PhD in psychology from Columbia University, and had worked as a clinical psychologist in Hollywood before branching out as a radio DJ, actor, writer, and director.
Interesting turn of events for him.
Yeah. His comic sensibilities led to Griffith injecting a lot of Jewish humor into the script. A lot of this movie has the kind of like telltale elements of Jewish humor, like thumbing your nose at authority, like self-deprecating humor, things like this.
So a bit of a Mel Brooks sensibility?
Yeah, I think that's a good touchstone. Jewish humor really also comes out of like the vaudeville tradition in many ways, and the cast's vaudeville bona fides were enhanced by the inclusion of Charles Griffith's grandmother in the cast, Myrtle Vale. Myrtle Vale plays Seymour's mother in this film, She was born in 1888, and she started doing vaudeville when she was 15.
Wow.
Her big hit came in 1932 when she created the radio show Mert and Marge, which starred herself and her daughter, Donna Damerel. The show was a big hit. It even got a movie adaptation during its run. And then in her retirement, Myrtle would appear in movies written by her grandson, Donna's son, Charles Griffith, sort of as like a favor, basically. She had already appeared in Bucket of Blood. She's like the older landlady who goes to investigate.
Okay.
Actor Wally Campo, who plays Joe Fink and thus narrates the picture, had appeared in a number of previous Corman pictures up to this point, including Beast from Haunted Cave. And Charles Griffith himself plays a number of minor roles throughout the movie in a kind of like, oh yeah, this character's on screen for like, 2 shots. Get Chuck in here to do it. Most notably in the movie, he is the voice of the man-eating plant, Audrey Jr.
Not Audrey 2?
No, Audrey 2 is from the musical.
Okay.
Yeah. In this movie, the plant is called Audrey Jr. An equally nonsense name for the plant. However, if you've bought any version of the 1960 Little Shop of Horrors on home video over the past 40 years, the chances are that the name you've seen in big letters over the title was Jack Nicholson, who appears in one scene for like a few minutes.
Okay.
He plays the role that Bill Murray plays in the movie musical.
Oh, I think I knew this, actually.
So Jack Nicholson is kind of a big deal. I'm going to talk just a little bit about him.
Yeah, he'll be starring in a future Corman picture, right?
Yes, and a bunch of other horror movies after that. So I'll have
plenty of time.
Yeah, exactly. But Jack Nicholson was born John Joseph Nicholson in 1937 in New Jersey. His mother was a 17-year-old showgirl who performed under the name June Nielsen, and his father was either showman Donald Rose or maybe Nielsen's manager Eddie King. Nobody really knows. But June's parents, John Joseph Nicholson and Ethel May Nicholson, took Jack in as a baby and raised him as their own because June was an unmarried 17-year-old showgirl. And he thought that his mother was his older sister until 1974, which was 11 years after June had passed away.
Okay.
In high school, he was the class clown, and in 1954, he was in detention every day for a year.
That tracks with what I know of Jack Nicholson.
He joined the National Guard in 1957 and served for 2 years, which he did in order to avoid the draft. Nicholson moved out to California to visit his show business sister and decided that he wanted to be an actor. His film debut was in 1958 in the title role of the teen-sploitation film The Crybaby Killer, which was produced by Roger Corman. He was 21 years old at the time, and it was the first film Corman had ever produced that failed to make a profit.
Whoa.
And so Corman did not want Jack Nicholson in The Passionate People Eater, but he kind of had to take him because they were making this movie in 2 days and they needed, to take who was willing to be in it, right?
They needed bodies.
Yes. So knowing this, Nicholson decided that he needed to play his character very over the top, very quirky, very funny in order to kind of justify the chance Corman was taking on him. And so he ends up creating one of the most memorable characters in the whole movie, despite, I think, being on screen for like 2 minutes.
I mean, that can work. He's lucky that it didn't pigeonhole him into a character actor, though.
Or
did it?
The thing is like Jack Nicholson is a character actor. He's just a character actor who played lead roles.
Yeah, that's fair.
Now, while there was some on-set ad-libbing by Dick Miller, Mel Wells, and Charles Griffith, who felt it was fine if he ad-libbed because he wrote the thing, the picture had a 98-page script by Charles Griffith that was like done by the time they started shooting and was pretty strictly kept to over the 2-day shoot. However, the ending of Nicholson's scene in the movie was never actually shot.
Oh.
He went in and they had all the sets pre-lit and everything like ready to go. Like everything was like clockwork on this shoot. And while shooting the scene where he is at this dentist's office, a piece of rented dental machinery started to tip over. And without yelling cut, Roger Corman rushed forward, grabbed the falling machine and saved it, decided that that machine getting damaged wasn't worth more shooting on this set, declared that that set was a wrap for the day, let's move on. And that's why Jack Nicholson's scene like fades to black in the middle of a shot in the movie.
Okay.
Nicholson's performance must have won Corman over because from that point on, he continued using Jack Nicholson very regularly. And eventually, Jack Nicholson became one of the most lauded performers of his generation. But that's a story for another time. So to shoot the picture as quickly as possible, Corman used the 3-camera setup of sitcoms where you have a basically evenly lit, pre-lit set that, only has 3 walls, and you set up 3 cameras, one shooting sort of across from the left and one from across from the right and one sort of straight on in order to catch like all of the angles you need in a minimum number of takes. The budget for the shoot was approximately $30,000. By 9 a.m. on the first day, the first AD told Corman he was already behind schedule.
Yeah.
They shot like all day, all night, all day. And then once shooting was complete on the sets, Griffith and Wells were sent out to shoot all of the exterior shots over 2 more weekends for $1,100.
So saying that this was shot in a weekend is a bit of a misnomer.
Yes.
Then, because they still did location shooting, so almost like second unit shooting.
Yeah, principal photography was done in 2 days. All the exteriors were done on these extra shoots, which Corman didn't go to. So yeah, it was very much a second unit. And they shot on location in the LA neighborhood of Skid Row, which is like downtown LA, was very well known then and now for its large homeless population. And so what Griffith and Wells did was like, they went around and used like real homeless people and real neighborhood children. Basically, they would get to a spot and just whoever happened to be there, they would pay them like 5 to 10 cents and be like, cool, you're in the movie now.
Well, at least they paid them because they didn't legally have to.
Sure. The movie's musical score is just a re-edited version of the music from Bucket of Blood.
I mean, it was good.
Sure. And the picture was edited, very quickly. There's a really famous story of like when they were editing, they realized that like there were 2 shots that just they couldn't cut between. Like they needed to go from shot A to shot B, but going directly like wouldn't work. They needed something to transition and they didn't have something to transition. So the editor just threw in a shot of the moon. And years and years later, after the movie had become like the big cult classic that it is, Charles Griffith like went to that editor and showed him this article in like a cinema magazine kind of thing that was like an 8-page article on the symbolism of the moon in Little Shop of Horrors.
That's awesome. I love when like, I mean, my entire degree was basically that of like trying to glean meaning from something that could have not even been done for that kind of purpose. Like this was done for a pragmatic purpose, but it still imparts meaning, which is a valid like interpretation. But it's funny how texts can be like that.
Yeah. After the film was completed, Corman kind of struggled for a while to find a distributor. AIP felt that the movie's humor could be taken as anti-Semitic, and so they kind of wanted to stay away from it. And ultimately, Corman spent like 9 months shopping the movie around for a distributor, which is the reason why it's released after Fall of the House of Usher, although it was shot before. Ultimately, Corman made the decision to release it himself through his own company, Film Group. And so it was Film Group who submitted the film to be played at the 1960 Cannes Film Festival.
This movie went to Cannes?
Yes.
Have we ever seen a movie that's been to Cannes before?
I don't know. Maybe Le Diabolique?
Maybe.
I think maybe. But after that, AIP agreed to pick it up for distribution.
They were like, oh, the French saw it? Okay, the Americans can see it now.
Yes. And they programmed it as the B picture to their release of Mario Bava's Black Sunday.
Okay.
Now, AIP basically did no marketing for Little Shop of Horrors. It's basically like a little box on the like Black Sunday poster that's like added attraction, Little Shop of Horrors, and that's about it. But the success of Black Sunday meant that a lot of people saw Little Shop of Horrors, and it got this like really positive word of mouth. And so eventually AIP like produced posters for Little Shop of Horrors as it got re-released over the years. And so those posters have like all these critics quotes on it about how funny it is. Nicholson remembers going into like a screening of the movie and struggling to hear the dialogue because the audience was laughing so hard.
He's like, keep it down. I can't hear myself.
Yeah, basically. He said he felt embarrassed because nothing he had ever done in his life had gotten that positive a reaction before.
Why would he be embarrassed about that?
Because like when you're used to just getting nothing but negative attention your whole life, I think positive attention can feel like, oh, who, me? Variety gave the film a rave review. They said that the performances were delightfully over the top, and declared that horticulturalists and vegetarians would love this movie. And the picture's popularity grew as it was shown on TV through the 1960s and 70s. So it really, developed this kind of organic cult movie appeal.
I like that it was organic.
However, like a lot of his movies from this period, Corman neglected to copyright Little Shop of Horrors because he believed it had little money-making potential past its original run. And so for this reason, the movie has been a staple of low-quality home video releases for decades.
So when they made the musical, they wouldn't have to pay like licensing or anything?
So the musical adaptation was created in 1982. It was a off-Broadway show by Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, who would go on to kind of be the guys who did like
at Disney.
Yeah, the Disney Renaissance movies. And, the success of the off-Broadway version would lead to the famous film adaptation of that musical in 1986 by Frank Oz. The thing is, the movie's not copyrighted. So that means that anyone can like show or copy the movie. But like the premise, the screenplay is still protected by copyright.
Okay. Until the guy dies.
Yeah, not because of like it having been copywritten or not, but just due to the way that like intellectual property law works. At first, the musical only paid royalties to Roger Corman. Like they went to Roger Corman and they were like, hey, can we make Little Shop of Horrors a musical for some dough? And Roger Corman was like, yeah, I always like money. And then after the musical came out was this big hit, Charles Griffith was like, it was my idea. I wrote the script. So he sued and they ended up rewarding him like 1/4 of royalties or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically now like the musical has like totally eclipsed the original in popularity. Largely just because of like I think a generational thing. Like my parents know this movie really well because they were like, kids when this was being shown on TV all the time. They were the generation that this was the cult movie for. And then now like it's, we're a couple generations later. And so the 80s movie is the thing people have the nostalgia for, right? Like that's how the cycle has gone. They announced a remake in 2019 that was going to be like a pure horror movie, not a musical, but that basically stalled out. Like COVID happened and so they never shot it and the project stalled out and now it's not really happening anymore.
Okay. Well, that's too bad, but I am excited to see this. How are we watching it?
Well, Sarah, as I kind of alluded to, there's a lot of different releases of Little Shop of Horrors out there. Online, you can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Canopy. You can find it on Tubi. Everyone's released it on DVD or VHS or Blu-ray at some point or another. I think the best release on Blu-ray is probably Legend Films. But the thing is Legend colorized the movie, which is like a easy way to get a copyright on your version of it. And the black and white version is available on the Blu-ray release, but the default version of Little Shop of Horrors, if you're on YouTube or Amazon, is the colorized version. So you kind of have to hunt around for the black and white, but it's on our YouTube playlist in black and white.
Okay.
And if you watch it on like Canopy, it'll be black and white. And I think Tubi as well, because that's the public domain version, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, if you find the colorized version but not a black and white version, you can just like change your TV settings.
I guess that's fair.
Any movie can be black and white if you try hard enough.
That's true.
Well, folks, hopefully you can find a copy to watch along. If you want to find our YouTube playlist, you can head to screamscenepodcast.com and, find it there. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss The Little Shop of Horrors from 1960, directed by Roger Corman.
See you on the other side, everybody. Welcome back to Scream Scene, everybody. We just finished watching The Little Shop of Horrors from 1960, directed by Roger Corman. Sarah, what'd you think?
I think it was fine. My first exposure, obviously, as has been said, was the musical, and I think it really improved upon what is here. I think what is here is fine and comedic and whatever, but I don't think the comedy fully works on me. There were moments where I was like, or had a grin, or did a, the kind of laugh, huff,
Sure.
But I don't know. Nothing particularly special for me. What about for you?
Well, as I mentioned, I grew up on this first and then saw the musical later in life. I think I was in elementary school when I watched this for the first time, and maybe I was a little bit older, like junior high, when I saw the musical. I like this better, but I think part of that might be also the fact that, especially when I was younger, growing up and making my own movies and these kinds of things, the very low budget, let's just have fun and make a movie kind of atmosphere of this film was really charming to me. And the immensely polished, extremely high budget, big Hollywood energy of the musical, obviously isn't charming in the same way, right?
Yeah, it's charming in a musical way, not in the way that you're describing here.
Yeah, and so when that DIY thing is one of the things you like best about the property, when that goes away, it just isn't as good. But I think neither of these takes are bad takes. They're just fair subjective opinions.
Yeah. What's kind of nice is we have the two sides of the coin represented here.
Yeah.
Which is nice. It's nice when we have different perspectives like that. Why don't I give the plot?
For
and
sure.
then we can kind of dig in.
Okay.
Do you want to give the correction, though, of what you said about the moon?
Well, okay. So in the context setting, I mentioned a shot of the moon. That's a direct quote. So in the film itself, it's not a shot of the moon. It's a shot of the setting sun.
Okay.
But the anecdote that Charles Griffith tells about that is that it was a shot of the moon. So he's misremembering. I'm not misquoting. I'm not wrong. He's wrong. And I'm just correctly reporting his mistake.
Sure. I do want to just point out that you are being very emphatic about, I'm not wrong.
That's right.
The person who worked on the movie was wrong.
That's right.
Okay. So the movie is mainly focused on the florist shop of Gravis Mushnick. It's a floundering flower shop. He has two employees, Audrey and Seymour. Seymour has yet again messed up an order, and Mushnick is ready to fire him when Seymour says, wait, I have a new flower that you might be interested in. Let me show it to you at least. Mushnick isn't particularly interested in this, but a store patron played by Dick Miller says that, if it's something brand new, that could be a good marketing trick to get people in the door so people buy flowers and you make money. So Mushnick is like, all right, bring in the flower, let me see. Seymour brings in the plant, says that it is named Audrey Jr. He made it by crossing two different breeds.
A butterscotch and a Venus flytrap, I think is what he says.
Yeah. But this plant is not doing super well, but it's clearly interesting and different. It looks pretty much exactly like what it does in the musical at this stage, where it's just a big egg-like bud with some leaves off of it. Mushnick gives him, a week if he can make it if he can heal it and have it be of interest, maybe I won't fire you. So Seymour, spends the whole night trying to take care of it and accidentally pokes his finger, and some of that blood goes towards Audrey Jr. and Audrey Jr. starts to eat it. So Seymour pokes the rest of his fingers, feeds the blood to the plant, and then when he comes back in the next morning, the plant has doubled in size. And that marketing idea is working. People are coming in, wanting to learn more about the plant. Mushnick is very happy with this. So he's like, Seymour, keep it going. It becomes clear that the plant needs more food quite frequently, otherwise it begins to wilt. That night, Seymour's looking after the plant, and it speaks with the famous line of, feed me. There's no line of feed me Seymour like there is in the musical, which I don't know why I felt disappointed about, but whatever. But
yeah,
what is neat...
It's just feed me.
Yeah, and I'm starving. All these kind of lines around, I need food.
My favorite thing about this is that I mentioned earlier, it's Charles Griffith doing the voice. It's also not ADR'd. It's just him off camera, yelling the lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seymour's like, I don't have any more blood for you. I need some for myself. And Audrey Jr.'s like, I don't care. So Seymour's like, okay, let me go for a walk and think about what to do here. He goes for a walk and he goes towards the rail yard, sees a bottle nearby and goes to throw some rocks at it to knock it down and accidentally hits a guy who kind of stumbles around, and then that guy gets hit by a train. So Seymour's like, oh, fuck. The logical thing to do is to gather up those body parts, put them in a bag, and find a way to dispose of them. He can't find a way to dispose of them, so he makes his way back to the flower shop with these body parts, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And then Audrey Jr.'s like, feed me. I'm hungry. I smell food. So Seymour feeds the body parts to the plant. Meanwhile, Mushnick is out for dinner. He needs to come back to the store for money. He comes by and sees what Seymour is doing. And, he kind of loses it a little bit. But his guilty conscience melts away when he sees in the next morning that the marketing has again really increased sales. And Audrey Jr.'s has also increased. It's much larger now.
And by this point, it's the size of a car.
Yeah, it keeps doubling. It's exponential. Seymour comes in that morning with a toothache, but before he can do anything about it, Mushnick corners him and he's he doesn't let on that he knows that, Audrey Jr. eats people, but he's kind of it won't need to eat anymore, right? What's going on? And Seymour's like, no, I don't think it'll need to eat anymore. Apparently, Venus flytraps only need to eat 3 times in their life, which is not accurate at all. But he's like, yeah, I don't think it'll need to eat anymore. So Mushnick is like, great, sweet, go get your tooth figured out. Seymour goes to the dentist, whose order is the one that he messed up at the beginning of the movie. Now, this dentist is sadistic. and, is wanting to pull more teeth than is necessary. It also seems to kind of be implied that maybe he wants to get revenge on Seymour for messing up the plant order. Seymour kind of grabs the drill and they start dueling because, remember, this is a comedy. And Seymour takes the drill and accidentally drills it into the dentist and kills him. He has to find a way to dispose of the body, so he takes it to Audrey Jr. Now, the police have gotten involved. This is Sergeant Joe Fink and his officer, Frank Stooley. They are investigating the disappearances of a railway detective and the dentist. They come to the florist shop to do some investigating, at the same time as a representative of the Society of Silent Flower Observers comes in to see Audrey Jr., meet Seymour, and says that the society is going to give you an award for this amazing plant that you've put together. Audrey wants to go out on a date with Seymour. Everything seems to be coming up Seymour. Mushnick is like, yeah, you go on your date and I'll watch the plant tonight and make sure no one else dies, because he knows that every time the plant doubles in size, someone has died. As he's watching the plant in the middle of the night, Mushnick gets held up by a robber.
Who I believe is played by Charles Griffith.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Hilarious. And he manages to talk the robber into looking inside Audrey Jr. for where the money is hidden, and so that robber gets eaten. Audrey Jr. continues to grow in size. The next night, Seymour is like, no, I'm not going to do your bidding anymore. I'm not going to feed you more people. And so Audrey Jr. hypnotizes him in a very silly way.
Yeah,
It's totally just riffing off of the B horror movie idea of hypnotizing someone. Like,
yes,
that was a moment that I enjoyed.
It's absolutely like a parody of how easy it is to hypnotize people to do your bidding if you're like a B movie villain, because it's literally just Audrey Jr. being like, you're tired. Now you're asleep. Now you're awake again. You're under my command. All right, go get me food. Like...
Yeah, it's very fun. So Seymour goes out. He attracts the eye of a sex worker who has to basically convince Seymour into wanting to become a business partner, a customer.
It really bears mentioning that, like, Seymour
is an idiot.
Is an idiot. Like, everyone in this movie is kind of an idiot. Seymour's an idiot to, like, a cartoonish degree. The whole scene with the sex worker is basically like cartoon humor. Like, it's something out of like a Looney Tunes cartoon.
It really felt like that, especially the way that the sex worker will like go off one side of the screen and pop up on the other.
Yeah, she's like fucking Wile E. Coyote over here.
Yeah, it was fun. But she gets, through a roundabout way, she gets knocked out, and Seymour takes her to the plant. He thinks that she's volunteered for it. All right, it's the night of the awards ceremony, and, they're hoping for, like, the buds to open in time for the ceremony, so everyone is here. The police are here because they have no more clues. Seymour is here, his mom is here, Audrey's here. All of the customers that we have seen and gotten to know throughout the course of the movie are here. Suddenly, the buds open, and they all have the faces of the victims. Everyone kind of freaks out. Seymour's like, oh no. And the police are like, hey, why are you acting suspicious? And Seymour starts running. So the police and Mushnick go chasing after him. He loses the cops. And so Seymour comes back to the florist shop and he's like, damn it, Audrey Jr., my life is ruined now. Thanks to you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to cut you up from the inside. So he takes a knife and he goes to go inside the main bud. We cut to other people coming into the florist shop. His mom, Audrey, Mushnick, the cops. And suddenly a smaller bud opens up and it has Seymour's face. And we hear the voice of him saying, I didn't mean to do it, or something like that.
I didn't mean to.
I didn't mean to.
Which is what he says to, like, everything through the movie.
Kind of like the Family Matters, like, did I do that?
Yeah.
Anyways, and then the movie ends.
Mm-hmm.
As I said at the top, I think the musical really improves and builds upon what we have here. What we have here works for like what it is, for like a 1960 horror comedy, but I feel like it's pretty set in its time. And I think also part of what makes it feel old is its reliance on vaudeville, like the physical
totally.
comedy. Audrey's speech, even, she tends to mix up different words. Like at one point she says she's so hungry she could eat a hearse instead of a horse. All of the comedy here really feels vaudevillian.
Yeah, totally. So like none of the characters have depth. There's no real attempts here at character arcs or characterization.
No.
And every character is a comic character. There's basically no straight characters here. And everybody has, a gimmick. Like Seymour is really dumb and he's also a klutz. So he has a lot of like slapstick humor around that. Audrey is, a well-meaning airhead, basically is her gimmick. Seymour's mom is like this intense hypochondriac. Mushnick is, the greedy businessman. There's, Dick Miller's character eats flowers. There's some teens who want to make a float for the parade, and they are like just very much like parodies of kind of like
Beatles fans.
Beatles fans, yeah.
Because they keep going, oh, Seymour.
Yeah. The Cops, as already mentioned, are like beat for beat Dragnet parodies.
I did enjoy the Cops.
Yeah, they're very funny. All of the characters are like this, right? And yeah, it is very vaudevillian. It's also, to use like a more modern, I mean, not very more modern, I suppose, by today's standards, but like a slightly more modern touchstone. It's got the vibe of like a long SCTV or SNL skit, which I guess makes sense because then the musical has Rick Moranis and Steve Martin.
Yeah.
Right. But that's the kind of feeling this has, right from like the cheap sets to the fact that like every line is a joke. Mm-hmm. There's not really anything. And like that the jokes aren't like, it's not just the plant that is fantastical. We pointed out that like the sex worker sequence feels like Looney Tunes, but like a lot of the movie is like that, right?
Yeah, we are clearly not set in the real world.
Right. The dentist is a sadist. He has the patient who's a masochist. Like everything's a gag here. And if you haven't seen this movie, like the style of humor is very much an attempt, I think, at aping like a Jerry Lewis, Mel Brooks style. Like if this movie had been an A picture and it was made like 10 years later, like you could see Jerry Lewis playing Seymour, you could see Mel Brooks playing Mushnick. Like that's the vibe those characters have, right? Yeah, you can honestly with Seymour, like you can really see why they cast Rick Moranis.
Yeah. I think your analogy of an SCTV or SNL skit is right on the money, particularly when those skits feel like they go on too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said when we finished it that you felt this was like a little tiresome.
Yeah, the charm that you find in the DIY low budget thing is there for me, but it almost relies on that being the butt of the joke too much to the point where I'm just like, yeah, I get it. They're running around. Oh, great. We're running on tires. Okay. I don't care. Yeah. Let's just fucking wrap up, my guys. Like, I just found it like a little tiresome. We're running between two different locations. And I think at that point in the movie, it's like its climax. It is rightly so, I think, like assuming and relying on the comedy up to that point and in that sequence to kind of carry you through so you're along for the ride. But its charm had worn off on me by that point, so I found it tiresome. So it's tiresome without that buy-in. And an SNL skit that goes on too long, like the people in the skit are probably having a good time, and that's why they're kind of extending it and like they're really pushing it. But that kind of pushing the premise as like a comedic joke doesn't always work for everyone. And for me, it doesn't work here.
Yeah, totally. I think, the critiques you have are very valid. The structure of the movie is very repetitive.
Yeah.
Especially because other than like a change in joke in the sense of like, the dentist is crazy and the sex worker is persistent and so on, the basic structure of all the victims of Audrey Jr. is very similar in that like the storyline kind of goes out of its way to absolve Seymour and Mushnick of like too much responsibility for these people's deaths. Like the railway guy dies by accident. The dentist kind of dies by accident in the sense that Seymour didn't mean to kill him, but like
it's manslaughter,
right?
Or self-defense, but not like malicious murder.
Yeah, and that's the Self-Defense Act part of it too. Yeah, is like it's this guy kind of deserved it, and like the sex worker, they go out of their way to concoct kind of like a goofy chain of events to knock her out. The burglar obviously has like a he deserved it quality to it. And so seeing that repeat over and over definitely can be tiresome, especially if you're not like enjoying whatever the gag with the individual character each time is.
And the gag in between each night and each death is very similar, of like the teen girls wanting the flowers for their float, or, oh no, this lady has another relative who has died and needs flowers.
Yeah.
Oh, Dick Miller is coming for his lunch to eat some carnations.
Yeah, the scenes at the shop are basically the same. They just sort of increase in intensity as things are going on. I also agree with you that the ending's a little anticlimactic. The running around after Seymour is clearly like meant to have a kind of not just like cartoon quality, but like
a Benny Hill.
Yeah, harkening back to like Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
Kind of thing of them chasing him around in increasingly ridiculous situations. But then it kind of peters out because he loses them. And then like we have this thing of like he wants to attack Audrey Jr. And really, I think it's this ending with Seymour where the low budget finally
catches up to them.
Yeah, becomes an issue rather than a asset. Yeah, because he grabs like a little kitchen knife and the mouth of Audrey Jr. is open and he kind of climbs inside with it and he's like, I'm gonna stab you. And then it closes on him and then we cut to a new scene like Sarah was describing earlier. And so it doesn't, have a lot of energy to it because the plant prop can't do much. Like it makes me think
it opens and closes.
Yeah, like it makes me think of Bela Lugosi in the water with the octopus that doesn't have the motor, right? Like shake it around, make it look like he's killing you.
You know what I wanted? When the robber goes in, he drops his gun. I wanted Audrey Jr. to have the gun and pull the gun on Seymour and have that be the climax. How wild would it have been to see a plant wielding a gun?
Oh yeah, totally. Like the fact that Audrey Jr. in this movie doesn't have like vines or anything where it can manipulate stuff is a letdown. But it's also like, they shot this in a weekend. Like,
listen, I'm just saying that would have helped the climax.
Yeah. I'm saying like, I agree with you. It's like, I'm not faulting the movie for not being able to do things it couldn't do, but it is, like I said, it's where the budget catches up to them and makes it weaker. And the like ultimate ending where, it eats Seymour and the bud opens and it's like, I didn't mean to. And like, it, that's fine. Like it has a very like Twilight Zone ending kind of feel, right?
And I think that's probably what they're riffing on.
Yeah. But like, it's a little bit troublesome, because that final confrontation between Seymour and Audrey Jr. is so flaccid, and also because like the movie had gone out of its way so much to absolve Seymour of responsibility that like the ironic O. Henry ending where he gets his comeuppance also doesn't like feel right either. And I think that also plays into another thing that can be a weakness of this movie depending on what your level of buy-in is, which is because all of the characters are comic characters, few of the characters are like likable in any way.
Yeah, at no point is there a clear person who you feel like you want to root for. Because like I feel like what Rick Moranis manages to do is bring in a bit of charm where you like him, you want Seymour to succeed, you want him to get that white picket fence. The Seymour in this original version,
he's a lot more pathetic.
He's pathetic, and you pity him, and it's like, oh sweet, you want to be a botanist. Okay.
He's also just too dumb for like his goals to, it's like you were never going to become a botanist. Like there's nothing, the thing that's holding Seymour back in this movie is Seymour. And like, he's so dumb that like his mom, who's a hypochondriac, like makes meals out of like medicine or patent medicines. And Seymour like literally has never had like real food. Like that's that's the joke at one point. Like Audrey makes him a PB&J sandwich and he doesn't know what it is. And so it's like at that stage, you've made him like so dumb that he's just an object of ridicule, right?
Yeah.
And even Audrey, like Audrey's close to the most likable person, but she's also like kind of so dumb that it's hard to empathize with her.
I will say that is still a problem in the 80s movie. That's like a big problem I have with the 80s movie.
Like the most likable person might actually be Dick Miller's character, who just like casually eats flowers.
Yeah, I really liked Dick Miller. I think Mushnick is like the next closest in terms of like looking at our three main characters. Like,
yeah, even though he's this like a greedy businessman type, he's got that kind of like oy vey, like again,
what
like,
am I in now?
Yeah, like Quark from Deep Space Nine kind of like thing where you know he's a scumbag, but you kind of like him.
Yeah, well, it was just like it brought in a little bit of a different flavor into the profile of this movie when Mushnick was dealing with his own conscience, right? Like, because Seymour is so dumb that it's just almost like he doesn't have a conscience.
He like, kind of like knows what he's doing is bad, but it's very much this like, oh, gee, Rick, like kind of energy.
Not even. It's a like, oh, did I do that? Did I murder someone? Oops. Whereas Mushnick is like, this plant can't eat any more people. I'm going to make sure it doesn't eat any more people. Oh, fuck. I'm being held up by a robber, I guess, into the plant.
Right.
Like, it just felt a little bit more engaging.
Sure. Yeah. Like, ultimately, this thing is very bound, right?
Yes. I will say, as much as, like, this movie didn't quite do it for me, I think everyone making the movie is fully dedicated.
Oh, yeah.
Dick Miller is literally eating flowers. Jonathan Hayes is falling over backwards multiple times in the same shot. No one's treating this as a weekend shoot.
Mm-hmm. Everyone's clearly having a good time, and that's the thing that really makes, again, like an SCTV or SNL bit work, right? But yes, the very like stage-bound kind of quality of it is a weakness. Just the fact that it's long. I also think structurally, the thing I want to point out about the repetitiveness in the structure, this is basically the same structure as Bucket of Blood.
Yeah, I kept thinking about Bucket of Blood, and I was like, why was that so working so well? Whereas this one, I just did not have the patience for it.
So what's funny is, I think Little Shop of Horrors is funnier than Bucket of Blood, but I do think Bucket of Blood's a better movie because it has character arcs.
Yeah.
And what's happening here is like this was written in a day and shot in 2 days. And so you can't like expect a lot out of it. And so I think one of the shortcuts Griffith uses is he basically uses Bucket of Blood as like a skeleton, and then he's hanging the jokes on that. And so there's not really the care put there towards like making the arcs land because it's just a scaffold for jokes, right? But like the idea of like, okay, we have a setting, we have kind of like a dweeby character nobody likes, we have the girl he has the hots for, we have kind of like the owner of the place where he hangs out who starts to take advantage of him once he starts to become like a little famous for something. But the thing that's making him famous, that's making people like him, is something where he has to keep killing people to make it happen. And we end with like a weird chase sequence that isn't very good, right? Like it's the same movie.
It is. The chase sequence in Bucket of Blood really worked, though.
Yes.
Because it was like taking a lot of visual inspiration from The Third Man. And as you said, in The Little Shop of Horrors, they were taking inspiration from Keystone Cops.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is dated and won't always land for the right people.
The Dragnet parody is like bang on, though.
I hear it was good. The mom talks to one of the detectives and is like, "Let me see your tongue," and she's like, "Oh no, do you know what you have?" And he's like, "Only the facts."
Yeah,
and I was like, "That's the two cops were good.
They're very good." Also, like, I just have to point out that like all the babes in this movie are very cute. The actress who plays Audrey is very cute. The woman who's like the head of the Flower Society that's going to give him the trophy is very cute. Like,
she was distractingly beautiful.
Yeah,
I will say.
Yeah, she looks like Jerry Ryan. Yeah, no, totally. So like, you know, there's a lot of nice eye candy in that regard. I think something that would really help this movie out a lot and maybe help the repetitive feeling that you were having with it. The music is bad.
The music is so bad. It's still taking inspiration from like the beat stuff because it is just like
it's
reworking of Bucket of Blood. I really wish they had taken some time and some money to make an original score.
Yeah.
Even if it was still inspired by like beatnik stuff, like it does not work for this movie. It makes the chases feel like, well, unfortunately long.
I think the problem is that like the Bucket of Blood music, like it ranked, like we ranked it, right? Like it's a horror comedy, but it sort of got one foot in still taking it seriously. And like Little Shop of Horrors does not at all. Like Little Shop of Horrors is a cartoon. And so like those chase sequences needed much more like fun, cartoony, jokey music rather than reusing the chase sequence music from Bucket of Blood, because by the time we're doing the chase in Bucket of Blood, like the walls have closed in around Walter Paisley and like harsh reality has come crashing down on his like imaginary make-believe world. And you know, things get dark. Whereas for Little Shop of Horrors, like they do a bit where like Mushnik goes to like trip Seymour, and Seymour, who's tripped over everything all movie, like leaps over his foot. He's getting chased by cops who are parodies of the guys from like Dragnet. Like he
hides in a toilet.
Right.
Like it's Scooby-Doo.
Yes. I mean, yeah, absolutely. It needs to have different music. And I think if this movie had some music that was unique to it, I think it absolutely would have improved the vibes of it.
Improved the viewing experience.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I really like this movie. And I will say, you know, coming back to what I said at the top about like the polish of the movie musical versus this, I find this often with movie comedies. I really like sketch comedy. I really like SCTV. I really like SNL. Both of those shows have their ups and downs. But often when those characters get adapted to like a film, they lose something. And I think part of what it is when you're shooting something on a tight schedule, you know, week to week for TV or in a weekend for this, the jokes have a kind of like immediacy to them that gets lost when you're doing something a lot more coordinated, like a big budget film. And that was something I liked here, is just the sense that like the jokes feel like everyone's just riffing off each other, even though I know that it's like a carefully written script.
Yeah. Well, maybe not carefully, but definitely a written script.
A written script. Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, folks, as this is horror adjacent, we will not be ranking it. But if you do want to see the other horror adjacent episodes, you can find the full list of them on our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can also find links to other episodes that we may have mentioned, as well as our appeals box if you would like to contest the ranking of any previous movie, or want to alert us if there's something about the Little Shop of Horrors that you wanted us to mention and we just didn't get to it. You can also email us at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com if you don't want to message us through Tumblr.
Scream Scene updates every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spotify. You can subscribe to the show using our RSS feed. You can leave the show a rating or a review. You can help the show out by letting people know about it online or in person. And we also really appreciate it if you head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/ScreamScenePodcast, where you can become a patron of the night and support us for as little as $1 a month. You get access to a huge archive of past bonus content, including the 6-hour Dread RPG actual play special that we did for Halloween, which is really cool, and I recommend you check it out. At the $5 level, you get access to regular bonus audio. $10 level gets access to a bunch of like writing that Sarah and I have done. There's a lot of cool goodies over on patreon.com/ScreamScenePodcast.
Well, Ben, what are we watching next week?
Well, we're back to horror, like real horror, but we are staying in the low-budget American sort of B-movie realm. We're looking at a movie from director Burt I. Gordon.
Oh.
And we haven't really covered a lot of his stuff on the show because his gimmick was...
Thing big.
Yes. Like taking a tarantula and making it a giant tarantula, or a man or a woman and making them really like giant, or making things small. He could do that too. All basically the same way, just by like shooting the regular thing on a blue screen and optically printing it into a shot. A lot of his movies are therefore like, you know, drive-in monster movies, but they're not really horror. This film is more of like a gothic horror ghost story thing, I think. It's very different from his usual fare. It's called Tormented.
Is the ghost big?
I don't think so.
Oh.
So that's why I'm like, huh.
Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.